Greetings one and greetings all, and what a treat it is to welcome you to this, the 8th episode of the English Heritage History at Home live series. I'm your host, Ben Shires, and this week I've given my trusty sidekick, Olive the Cockapoo, the day off for good behaviour. Now, I know her extended cameo last week split opinion. So some of you thought she was really cute, whilst others, well, you just thought she was downright adorable, and you're all right. And if you're missing her, don't worry, she'll be back again for another episode, chewing on the bones of history very soon. Now, as always, I'm broadcasting from my home in York, England, and as always, we'd like to know who you are, where you're watching from, and in honour of the exciting upcoming weekend, what your plans are for the summer solstice. So let us know in the comments below, and we'll try and give you a shout out as we go along. Oh, and if you're wondering, I'm hoping to be outdoors as much as possible this weekend, socialising from a social distance and avoiding cutting my lawn at all costs. Now, as well as shout outs, we'll also be answering your questions on today's topic at the end of the show. So make sure to send them in as they occur to you. And don't forget, we'll be setting a brand new creative challenge too. And speaking of challenges, it's that time again when we're wowed by some of your amazing offerings from last week's challenge. After we asked you to design your own illuminated letter and maybe even come up with your own Arthurian legend around it as well. So let's take a look at this first one, which is incredible. These are the Marsden children from Derbyshire. And they work together on their illuminated letters, which feature a koala, a bird, and Excalibur the sword. That is fantastic. Great work to you all. Next, here's Rose, who's 9, and Poppy, who's 8, from Birmingham. And they've made their illuminated manuscript and letters using paper and pens and all sorts of different things there. Rose has made her L into a tower, if you can see that, with a knight going to rescue a fair maiden. And Poppy did hers with pictures of Arthur, Merlin's cap, and an owl, which is just brilliant. And lastly, take a look at this one. This is Evie from Scotland. Now, we featured Evie and her sisters plenty of times on these English Heritage live lessons because they're always getting involved with the challenges. And this one is as good as any of their efforts I've seen. Look at that for an incredible illuminated page and a story to go with it. You could imagine that in any ancient text. I absolutely love it. Well, I hope you enjoyed those illuminated letters. They really lit up the screen, didn't they? Do you get it? Because they're illuminated, so they lit up the... forget it. Anyway, there'll be a different creative challenge for you at the end of today's episode. But for now, it's time to turn our attention to a very different kind of illumination, as this week we're discussing the solstice at Stonehenge, and back once again to shed some light on it all is the light of my life, Susan Greaney. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Ben. Hi, everyone. It's great to be back again.
Oh, it's lovely to see you, Susan. So obviously it's been a little while since we last caught up, Susan. How have you been keeping since we last saw you?
I've been good. I've been doing lots of walks and lots of baking, and I've been busy working for English Heritage, making sure that all of our website looks spick and span and has some great stuff on it.
Fantastic. Well, listen, you watching at home will be able to check that out later on. But for now, stay with us because we've got something really exciting to discuss. Because last time we saw Susan, that was our brilliant first episode where, Susan, you thrilled us with a monumental history of Stonehenge. Now, obviously, everyone who's watching right now will have seen that show maybe once, twice, or even 3 times if you're a real hardcore history fan. But just in case anyone's forgotten any of the important bits, can you give us a recap on the origins and history of this iconic site?
Yeah, of course. So Stonehenge is perhaps English Heritage's most famous site. It lies down in Wiltshire in southern England, and it was built around 2500 BC. That's about 4,500 years ago. And it was built in a period that we know as the Stone Age, and it was built right at the end of that period in a bit we call the Neolithic, the late Neolithic period. And Stonehenge is completely unique. It's one of many stone circles in the British Isles, but it's the only one where you find the lintels, those horizontal stones that join the other stones together. And it's also the only stone circle that's been worked and shaped so carefully. Last time we talked about it being a bit like Lego in the way that the joints fix it all together. So it's a really special site.
Absolutely. And many people will already know that this weekend is a really important one. Obviously, I'm referring to Sunday and Leeds United's crunch fixture away at Cardiff. But it's also important for another weekend, another reason, because this weekend at Stonehenge is the solstice. So what is so significant about the solstice?
Well, this weekend is the midsummer. It's the longest day of the year. And solstice is when the daylight hours are the longest. So we have the earliest sunrise and the latest sunset. You might have noticed that when you're getting up in the morning, it's already lots of bright sunshine out there. And you might have noticed when you're at night, it's in the sky. So we know that the people who built Stonehenge thought this was a really particularly special occasion, and they built Stonehenge to align with the solstice.
Absolutely, and it's very much focused on this long day, this long period of daylight that we're going to have this weekend, isn't it?
That's right. So the 20th and the 21st of June are the longest days this year, and we know them as midsummer solstice. 6 months later, it's the midwinter solstice. But we celebrate this time of year because it's the longest daylight, it's the warmest time, it's the middle of summer. And for us here in the British Isles, it really heralds the start of our summer season.
Oh, long days are the best, aren't they? I mean, after all, they mean even more time to get excited about that crunch Leeds United fixture at Cardiff. But enough of that for now. I'll park it. Instead, let's take a look at this excellent film from Dr. Maggie Adarin-Pocock that explains more about solstices, complete with homemade props.
Stonehenge is known for the solstices. But what is a solstice? Well, to explain, I've got a little demonstration. So this is the sun and this is the earth, but I need to point out they're not to scale. Now, many people are familiar that the earth rotates on its axis and the earth also orbits the sun. But what people don't realise is the earth is actually tilted on its axis, and it's this tilt that gives us the seasons. So in this position, the northern hemisphere is pointing towards the sun, so the northern hemisphere has longer days. When you get the longest day of the year, that is the solstice. Now, when you get the longest day of the year in the northern hemisphere, you're getting the shortest day of the year in the southern hemisphere. And so that's the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere and the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere. But let's travel on 6 months later. Now the northern hemisphere is in winter, is getting less sunshine, and the southern hemisphere is bathed in a lot more sunshine. It has longer days. So this is what Stonehenge was built to look at.
A great insight there from Dr. Maggie Adarin-Pocock, and some fantastic pictures of Stonehenge at the end as well. And let's take a little look now about what some of you lot will be doing this very special weekend. You've been getting in touch to tell us your plans for the summer solstice weekend. So Violet from London, who's age 7, says, I'll be watching the solstice online with my mum. And Rebecca in Luton says, we'll watch on English Heritage. And they're both right. There is going to be a live stream over the weekend of that solstice. We'll give you more details on that later, but it's definitely something that everyone can get involved in and something to look forward to. We've got this one as well, says, hello from Southampton, having a family summer solstice party and camping in the garden. That's from Nicola Bennett. Helen Catherine Davison says, we'll be watching from Melbourne, Australia. So it'll be the winter solstice. And that's what Dr. Maggie was saying just then, isn't it? When it's the summer solstice over in our hemisphere, Australia gets the winter solstice. Amazing. Hello again from Emily and Rory in Reading. We're planning to watch the summer solstice from Larden Chase in Streatley. Our topic this week is the summer solstice. We've made sundials, solar ovens, and built a model of Stonehenge out of biscuits. That actually reminds me of the challenge that we had in our very first live lesson. So well done you for that. And finally, Edward from Suffolk, who's age 6, is going to be making a Lego henge this weekend to celebrate the solstice. So lots of various ways that people are celebrating this incredible occasion. And Susan, I think we can all agree that solstices are amazing. I mean, what's not to like about having a bit more time for the barbecue? But what is their significance to Stonehenge itself? Are the stones some kind of ancient sun trap?
A bit like that, yeah. So the way that the stones are laid out at Stonehenge is set up to frame the sunrise at midsummer and the sunset at midwinter. And the picture we can see here is the sun rising just over the heel stone. And the heel stone is that stone that lies outside the stone circle, and it marks where the sunrise is on the longest day. So the whole of the monument is arranged around it. Here, this is a good picture to show you what the heel stone looks like close up. And actually what happens at midsummer is the sun rises and you get a great shadow from the heel stone projecting towards the stone circle. And from within, you can see the sun rising in that direction.
Wow. So is it called the heel stone because that's the first place the sun sets foot? Eh?
Maybe that's quite a good idea. It's actually, we don't really know why it's called the heel stone. Some people have suggested it comes from Helios, which is Greek for the sun. So some early antiquaries might have named it that because they realised the connection with that stone and the sun. Other people connect it to a legend about heels and witches, which haven't got perhaps time to go into today, or the idea that it heals, it leans over to one side.
Absolutely. Well, my historical puns have always been my Achilles heel stone, Susan, so we'll move on. But can you tell us how else the stones in Stonehenge actually line up?
Well, actually, it's quite difficult to describe. So let's have a look at a little video that I made earlier that shows you how the stones line up a bit more. Right, okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a virtual tour of Stonehenge now. This is a website called the Stonehenge Skyscape website, which we launched last year. And what it shows you is a view of Stonehenge. It's actually based on a webcam that's based around about 100 metres away from the stone circle. And it takes a photograph of the sky every 3 minutes. So this is what the weather is doing in the UK at the moment, quite a nice day. And that skyscape, that picture of the sky is projected onto a static version of the stones. So we can use this to have a little bit of an explore. We're stood right in the middle of Stonehenge at the moment, and we're looking in this position towards the northeast. And this part here, you can see, this is the outer sarsen circle. Sarsens are the really large stones at Stonehenge, which were brought from about 20 miles away. And this is the most complete section of the outer stone circle. But as we pan round, you can see that the stone circle is not complete all the way round. In fact, at the back here, there's lots of stones missing. So what would have been 30 uprights and 30 lintels is now sadly depleted. Within that, we have what we call the sarsen horseshoe, which is made up of 5 trilithons. And when I say trilithon, I mean 2 uprights and 1 horizontal stone, as you see here. So we have trilithon number 1, number 2, number 3 is the trilithon that stands at the head of the horseshoe, but as you can see, it's partly fallen down. So the upright has fallen towards us here, and its lintel can be seen. Its horizontal stone is lying in front of us, which would have originally stood on top here. Trilithon number 4, and then trilithon number 5. This one again, half of it has fallen down, and you can see that the upright and the lintel has fallen and is in front of us here. Between the sarsen circle and the sarsen horseshoe is a ring of blue stones. These are the much smaller stones. These are the ones that were brought from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales, about 150 miles away. And within the horseshoe, there's another ring of these stones. These ones are much more pillar, much more elegant shaped. But they were all brought from Wales. So that's the main layout. And what we're doing here is we're looking towards the northeast. And in the distance there, you can just about make out a standing single stone. It's actually a very large stone. It looks small from here. It's known as the heel stone. And that stone marks the rising sun on midsummer morning. So if you were stood here and looking at this view, please do come back and have a look at the website tomorrow when you'll be able to see it, or later tonight. You'll be able to see the sun rising over the heel stone, just in this direction. If I pan down, I can show you the compass. So you can see here we're looking directly towards the northeast. The sun actually rises slightly to the left of this stone. And in prehistory, kind of 4,500 years ago, it would have risen even more, about a solar diameter further to the left. And what we think is that there may have been a partner to the heel stone. Excavations a few years ago found a position of a stone standing here, and it may have been that the sun rose between the 2 paired stones. What the sun does, at the opposite end of Stonehenge, on the shortest day of the year, so in 6 months' time at midwinter, the sun actually sets and descends here, and it sets between the two stones of the tallest trilithon. Unfortunately, of course, the effect is lost today because half of this has fallen, but the sun would set down a very narrow rectangular slot. You can see how carefully the prehistoric people have worked and shaped the stones to frame this solstice axis, and the sun would set down here. And it would actually descend down into where this area, which is where the altar stone is. You might be able to just make out a lying stone underneath these fallen ones. That's a different type of stone to all the other stones on the site, and it's known as the altar stone for obvious reasons. So if I switch to the skyscape view, we can actually see that mapped out quite clearly. So I've got an arrow here that shows you the direction of the midwinter sunset. And you can also see in the sky that we've marked up the passages of the moon and the sun and the main planets. So here you can see actually the winter arc of the sun. So we have very short days in the middle of winter. The sun rises here and it sets here. But this shaded area shows you the full difference between winter and summer solstice. So here you can see that the summer solstice, the sun rises just over the heelstone. And then we're pretty similar to where we are today. We're nearly at noon here, just past noon, and then sets right over in this direction. So a completely different arc. So you can see the massive difference between winter and summer solstice, and how Stonehenge was really carefully arranged to reflect the movements of the sun on those 2 days.
Susan, that was fantastic. What a treat to have our very own guided tour around the Stonehenge stones by an expert. So thank you very much for that. And also, that website that you were using then is publicly available, isn't it? So people can go and have their own explore around the site.
That's right. It's Stonehenge Skyscape, all one word, .co.uk. So if you head over there after the live lesson, you can have a pan around and play with it. You can also even see the night sky and the stars using that website.
That's absolutely brilliant. So let's go back to Stonehenge and its importance with the solstice then, because it seems that this was a key event for the people who built it. Did they build Stonehenge specifically then just to celebrate these two longest and shortest days?
We think they did. We haven't got that many clues from Stonehenge as to how the site was used in the past. There's not that much evidence of feasting or lots of pottery or things that archaeologists normally find. And so we only really have the layout of the stones to help us understand why the site was built and how it was used. So we think that midsummer and midwinter were really, really important occasions for people in prehistory. And we have to remember that these people are farmers. They've got animals like pigs and cattle. They're growing crops. And so the seasons and the changing year and marking the key moments would have been really important for people at that time.
And we know that Stonehenge is old. It predates phones, it predates watches, it even predates my dress sense. And we know that it came before people were able to properly tell the time. So how did they know how to build the stones in Stonehenge to so specifically line up with the solstices?
Well, it's all about just watching the sun really carefully. It's about looking at the horizon and seeing where the sun rises and sets every day. And if you do that from the same place, you can even do it from your house. You can work out that the sun is moving every day just a little bit between sunrise and sunset. And so you could use sticks or markers to basically work out when the midwinter and the midsummer was. So people in prehistory were clearly observing the sky. This little plan shows you just how Stonehenge was aligned. We've seen that from within the monument, but looking at this from a top-down view, we can see how the horseshoe in the middle of the site there is aligned on that line of the solstice. And we can also see how some of the outlying stones that we know as the station stones form a rectangle, which were also lined up with that special solstice axis.
Now, like many people, I love a bit of sunshine, but no matter how fond I was of it, it would never inspire me to drag these hulking great stones countless miles in its honour. So why did it have that effect on the Neolithic people who built Stonehenge? Why was the solstice so important to them?
Well, it's probably not just practical. So we think that people probably had spiritual or religious beliefs that related to the sun, and that maybe these times of year, midsummer and midwinter, were times when it was a bit uncertain. Perhaps they needed to conduct ceremonies and rituals to make sure the sun started to move back in the opposite direction and the year continued to turn. We don't really know exactly what their beliefs were. They may have seen the sun as some sort of god or deity that had to be worshipped, or it may have been something more complicated than that. But certainly they thought that the sun and the movements of the sun were really, really important, and building this monument made that obvious to everybody who visited.
So solstice was obviously an important occasion for the people who built Stonehenge, but do we know exactly how they celebrated it? And if so, where, how, what the evidence was? Have we got any ancient streamers, any party hats, any Stone Age balloons?
Oh, that would be nice, wouldn't it? But no, unfortunately. But what we do have is lots of evidence, particularly from the midwinter solstice, that people were getting together and basically having a big party. There's a site near Stonehenge called Durrington Walls, where we found the houses where we think the builders of Stonehenge lived. And there, in amongst middens, rubbish dumps, and in big pits next to the houses, we found lots and lots of evidence of meat. Hundreds and hundreds of animal bones. So many animal bones, it could have fed hundreds of people. And they were throwing away the bones with the meat sometimes still attached. So they had excess quantities. This is feasting on a grand scale. So we know that people were getting together in large numbers and having large amounts of food. We've also found some bones of the pigs have got flint arrowheads embedded within them. And they've been burnt on the end. So we think that people, oh, here we go. This is a bone that shows you how, can you see at the end there? It's quite dark. It's been burnt. And this shows that people were hunting the pigs, killing them using arrows, bows and arrows, which they didn't need to do. These are domestic pigs. And then spit roasting them, having basically a hog roast and having a very delicious pork burger, probably, as part of the celebrations that took place at solstice.
That's amazing. I'm sure there's many solstices over the years that have been celebrated with a barbecue. And we've obviously established then that the Stonehenge solstice was this pivotal event. It's essentially the sport to Stonehenge's stadium, the play to its theatre, the gel to my hair. But celebrating solstice isn't something that's unique to Stonehenge, is it? So where and how else has it been marked?
Many people across the world in lots of different cultures celebrate summer solstice. We know that in ancient Egypt, for example, there was a sun god known as Ra that people worshipped. And we know in ancient China that midsummer solstice was a special day when their king, their leader, would climb up enormous steps in their important temples to communicate with the gods and communicate with the sun. Native Americans also have amazing sites where they mark the solstice sunlight alignment. And even in Europe, before Christian times, people would celebrate with bonfires and large events at midsummer.
And I know there's a lot of Neolithic monuments sort of nearby to Stonehenge, aren't there, that have a link to the solstice as well?
That's right, yes. So not only Stonehenge is aligned with the solstice, but also some of the other monuments that are within the World Heritage Site there. This is Woodhenge, where there was a set of circles of timber posts. They're now marked by these concrete markers today, because of course they've rotted away. But this monument was also aligned on the midsummer sunrise. So it's on the same axis, that same alignment as Stonehenge. And there are some other monuments nearby in and amongst those houses that we were just talking about. One called the Southern Circle, very similar to Woodhenge, which was aligned on the midwinter sunset. So again, these are monuments where people might have been gathering, might have been aligning them especially to mark the solstice. And it's not just in the Stonehenge landscape. A little bit earlier in the Neolithic period, we know there are other monuments in North Wales and in Ireland and in Scotland where the solstice was also marked. So there's a particular site in Anglesey in North Wales, there's a picture of it here, called Brinkelly D, which is a burial mound. And what happens on Midsummer's Day is the rising sun shines down the passage and into the inner space of the tomb. So people were burying their dead in places that aligned with the solstice. Similarly, it happens at Newgrange in Ireland and at Maze How in Orkney on the midwinter sunset.
It's absolutely amazing to see how people across the world and across different cultures have celebrated this occasion over the years. So let's take a look at how some of our audience are celebrating it this weekend. We've got Helen Klementov, I hope I've pronounced that right, Lofstrand in Stockholm, Sweden, who will keep the flag up the whole night as it doesn't really get dark at all this far north at this time of year. I bet that is incredible, almost 24 hours of sunlight. We've got Tommy and Ida from Newcastle under Lyme, and they're super fascinated by the solstice, and they can't wait to celebrate with a party in the garden at the weekend if it doesn't rain, which is always a danger in the British Isles at least. Thank you for letting us know what you're up to. And also do get your questions coming in for Susan. We'll be asking those at the end of today's episode. But for now, Susan, we've talked about how people have celebrated the solstice in years gone by. And the date this year is fast approaching. So it feels like a good time to bring up the more modern history. Have people been marking solstice at Stonehenge every year since it was built?
No, sadly, we don't think so. We know that it was celebrated in prehistory, but actually it was only rediscovered that the monument lined up with the solstice in the 18th century by a man called William Stukely, who was surveying the monument and drawing it and looking at it carefully. And he noticed that it had this alignment on the solstice. And it wasn't really until about the Victorian period, roughly 150 years ago, that people started to come and witness the sunrise at Stonehenge. They would pedal over from Salisbury on their bicycles and see if they could see this alignment. And really, numbers have gradually increased really over the 20th century. And there was even a really large music festival that happened at Stonehenge in the 1970s and 80s, a bit like Glastonbury, which also happened at the summer solstice. But nowadays, what we do is we open up the stone circle for free access on the solstice night, and up to 30,000 people can turn up to come and have a look at the sunrise.
Wow, that is incredible. Obviously, this year we're unable to open Stonehenge for safety reasons. We'll be discussing that in a bit more detail shortly. But just to go back to these more modern celebrations then, because in the grand scheme of things, and compared to the long history of Stonehenge as a monument, these celebrations are a fairly recent tradition, aren't they? Why do you think people have been once again drawn to this ancient site to celebrate the solstice?
There are lots of reasons why people come to Stonehenge at solstice. Some people have strong spiritual beliefs and personal connections to the monument. Other people just want to come and witness the spectacle, come and have a look at the gathering of people and see if there's going to be good weather enough to see if the sunrise is clear. So it's a really special occasion. Lots of people come. We've been trying over the last few years to make it much more family friendly and a much more safe and event. And it's just one of those special occasions. I think people like to be able to step outside of their normal lives, everyday lives, and come to somewhere really special and witness something about the turning of the year and the seasons that's elemental.
And Susan, on a personal note, I suppose you've been lucky enough to witness these in person. What's it like as an experience?
It's amazing. I've been at Stonehenge the day before solstice with nobody else there and been able to watch the sunrise, which was incredibly special. But actually, one of the things about solstice is this lovely gathering of people from all around the country, people of lots of different walks of life, everybody with interesting ideas and things to say, and everyone's so friendly. It's a really lovely occasion to experience.
Well, of course, in a normal year, there would be thousands of people gathering there this weekend to celebrate. Unfortunately, this year, things are going to be different. So can you tell us a bit more about what's happening this year?
Yeah, sadly for everybody's safety, because of COVID-19, we cannot have the normal celebrations that we have at Stonehenge. So we're closing Stonehenge. It's not accessible. Please don't travel to Stonehenge for solstice this year. However, what we are going to be doing is having the first ever digital solstice. So we're going to be able to live stream the sunrise from within the stone circle. And if you come to our English Heritage Facebook page, you'll be able to see a live stream of both sunset on Saturday night and sunrise on Sunday morning, and witness that sunrise for yourself. Fingers crossed the weather will be good enough to have a clear sunrise.
Let's hope so. And what an evolution for this incredible site that continues to inspire and amazed. What do you think the Neolithic builders of Stonehenge might have thought if they could have believed that a solstice there would actually be able to be watched potentially by every single person in the world?
Wow, yeah, I think that would have blown their minds slightly.
Absolutely. Well, it's blowing my mind and I can't wait to tune in myself. We'll give you all the full details on that at the end of the lesson. Speaking of which, we might be celebrating the longest day of the year, but our time has whizzed by today and we're actually coming towards the end of our chat, Susan. But luckily, we do have a few minutes left for our viewer questions. So let's see what you've been asking. So apparently, Susan, we can't see the comments. So we're actually fed these by our lovely English Heritage helpers, Abby and Charlie. So I'm only speaking on what I've been briefed on in our live document here. It says quite a few people are debating whether the stones have ever been moved.
Ah, good question. So the Sarsen stones, which are the really large stones at Stonehenge, they were set up and they have never been moved from their current position. A couple of them were restored to upright that had fallen down in more recent times, but nothing has been moved. The blue stones, however, which are those smaller stones, the ones that came from Wales, have been set in a number of different formations. So those ones have been moved around, but they don't make much difference to the solstice alignment.
Well, hopefully that will settle some of the comments and the arguments and the debate that's going on. I should say as well that we actually actively encourage this kind of discussion. History is always a movable feast. There's always different views and people chipping in. So it's great to see that you are all enthusiastic enough to want to comment on that. Next question, Susan, comes in from Rebecca, who's 38, and Ramona, who's 8. And they ask, why is the online sunrise on Sunday morning, not Saturday morning? I'm confused by when the actual solstice occurs.
Oh, this is a really tricky question. Okay, so the solstice itself is a particular moment. It's a particular time, and it's when the sun is actually directly at its closest point to the earth. And that's at 22:43. So it actually falls in the evening, just before midnight on Saturday night. And that means that the longest day of the year is technically Saturday, but the next day, Sunday, is only 1 second shorter. So we've basically got 2 longest days this year. And what we do is we celebrate at Stonehenge the sunrise and the sunset closest to that moment. So that means it's Saturday night sunset and Sunday morning sunrise.
Yeah, it can get quite confusing. And actually, when we were having our discussion before we actually did this live lesson today, I was confused about it, and Susan had to put me straight as well. So you're absolutely right to ask that question. We've got a question from Evie, who's age 7 in Surrey, and she asks maybe a difficult question to answer precisely, Susan, but what year did Stonehenge get built?
Well, our best guess as to when the stones got put up is 2500 BC. Now, that seems quite a precise date. It's handy of them to build it in a year that's quite easily quotable. But we actually have kind of estimates that the stones were put up maybe 50 years or so either side of that date. So as archaeologists, we can only make kind of guesses. Those guesses are getting more and more precise as we date things and as we have more knowledge. But around about 2500 BC, so 4,500 years ago from now, is when the stones got put up.
Incredible. I think that's pretty close to say this is 4,500 years ago, that we can date it that accurately. Now we've got Lily, who's aged 8. She asks, would the summer solstice help with an old time calendar, and how long will the stones last for?
Oh, well, the calendar question's really good. So some people have suggested, is Stonehenge a calendar? Now, it sort of is a calendar, but it's a lot of effort to go to just to be able to mark the days of the year, isn't it? You could just do it with a stick if you wanted to. There's a lot of effort gone into the stones, bringing the stones there and putting them upright. So yeah, it does function as a sort of calendar, but we think that's maybe not its main purpose. Although it aligns with the midsummer and the midwinter solstices, it's probably something a bit more than that. That's why we were talking about the religious beliefs of the people at the time. How long will the stones last for? Oh, I hope forever. The work that we do at English Heritage is to try and protect the stones, make sure that they're safe, make sure that they last so that future generations can learn about Stonehenge and learn about prehistory just as we are today.
Brilliant. And there's a question here from Bailey, Aya and Grace, who are in Derbyshire. And they ask, which relates to something that you mentioned earlier, why did people stop going to celebrate the solstice?
Oh, good question. So Stonehenge was built right at the end of the Stone Age when people were still using simple stone tools. And quite shortly after it was built, a whole load of changes came to the British Isles. People started arriving here from the continent, and they brought with them the first metals, copper and bronze. They brought with them probably new language, new religious ideas, new ways of doing things. And it seems that quite rapidly the old monuments that had been built before fell out of use. We don't really know exactly when Stonehenge became less important. Certainly it was important enough for a few hundred years. They moved the blue stones around a couple of hundred years later, for example. But by the early Bronze Age, when people were burying their dead in barrows around Stonehenge, we think that probably the monument had stopped being used, and perhaps people had forgotten exactly why it was built.
I suppose that's the thing about prehistory, when people didn't write things down. As soon as people stop telling those stories, you lose the knowledge, don't you? Which is tantalizing for historians and people analysing it in the modern era.
It's a really interesting time. I'm fascinated by what happened at that time and why everything changed so rapidly.
Now, Susan, we've got a question here which isn't based on any kind of measurable fact, but hopefully you'll be able to answer this. Finley would like to know if you prefer the summer or winter solstice.
Oh, I prefer summer massively. I mean, if you've ever visited Stonehenge, and I hope some of you have done, you'll know it's quite exposed. It's in the middle of nowhere and it's very windy. And at winter solstice, if you stand there for any length of time, you get very cold feet and you realise that the gloves and the hat you've bought are not quite good enough. So I would much prefer to be there at summer solstice when you've got the nice warm sunshine and the long daylight to celebrate.
Well, there you go. You heard it here first. Susan Greaney prefers summer solstice to winter. Hopefully, winter's feelings have been spared. But thank you so much for all your questions today. They were absolutely brilliant. And Susan, thank you for shedding a bit of light on all things solstice. You've been brilliant as always.
It's been a pleasure again. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before we go, there's just time to set our next creative challenge. We know that Stonehenge was built around the movements of the sun. So this week, your challenge is to try and capture the light of the longest day this solstice weekend using a photograph. So whether that's the sun shining onto the plants in your garden, or you and your family enjoying the sunshine on a daily walk, or the light shining through your window, maybe dappling the badge of your Leeds United football shirt, whatever it is, take a photograph of it. We'd love to see how you're spending that day and how the sun is affecting and inspiring you by landing on certain objects. Please, though, do remember it's incredibly dangerous to look directly at the sun. Don't look at it directly. Don't point your camera at it. Instead, photograph something that the sun is landing on and inspiring you in that way. I can't wait to see some of those photographs. I think we're going to get some really good ones this week. Well, I'm afraid that brings us to the end of today's show. Hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we'll be welcoming head gardener of Charles Darwin's home, Down House. He's called Anthony O'Rourke. He's going to be live here with us to talk about Darwin, his famous theory of evolution, and the experiments he conducted in his back garden. And incredibly importantly, just to remind you, for everyone's safety and well-being, we've had to cancel this year's summer solstice celebrations at Stonehenge itself. Please don't travel to Stonehenge for the summer solstice this year. We know how special this occasion is to so many of you, and we will be live streaming it on our social media channels for free. You can find the live stream on the English Heritage social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. The timings for the UK are on the screen right now. You can see them there. So make sure you're following our page and you'll get a notification when we go live. You can join our Facebook event for more information, which we'll put in the comments shortly. And in the Facebook event, we'll also list other time zones if you're watching from elsewhere in the world other than the UK, so you know when to tune in. And don't worry if it's just a little bit too early of a sunrise for you or too late of a sunset. Those videos will stay on our pages for you to watch anytime that you want. So hopefully you'll be able to share in that incredibly special occasion with us. We'll see you again soon. For now, though, thank you for watching and catch you next week. Goodbye.